he produced this kind of things.
Oh, really?
Out of, so instead of keeping minutes out of meetings, I get an animator.
But is an animator someone that works for you? Or is,
She's on contract.
Mhm.
Yes, so she supports if there is a big meeting.
Uh-huh.
And instead of minutes, she's producing.
No, I'm not so high on the
But you're
in the
doing even
echelons.
better, more professional stuff.
No, but this is something. No, but that's something that no. But you pay for it, and that's okay. I mean, you write to them. You in the website they have a buy button.
Yeah.
You buy them, then you get.
You have the rights to present.
You have the
your
rights for using in presentations. I mean, I have not checked later on because these are cartoons that I've used in the past a few times.
Yeah.
I don't know. You pay I guess $30 per cartoon. I don't know if it is the permission is for 1 year or 2 years or whatever.
Check it. We don't want them to get back to you or to Telefonica.
Oh no, no. I mean, when it's about something that I make in a reduced environment, I normally don't ask for the permission or don't pay. But in cases like this, I try to be careful. Probably if it was me, probably they would not come after me. If a company like Telefonica, probably somebody
Exactly.
would feel tempted to.
Yeah. No, but it's the last 6 months that I now have an illustrator that she comes to the meetings and is on effect quite a lot of things.
No. That's something that helps a lot. Yes.
Quite nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when I send something to my boss, he doesn't understand it. Honestly.
Yeah. This is something that helps as well. Yes.
No, you don't think so?
There were plenty in the like slow people come.
It doesn't look too bad.
We wait until 5 after 11.
Yeah, because the previous session was very late. There's
There's
never a dispute.
no dispute. There's never been disputes.
No, you know what it is?
Come on, no,
Academics say what they want to say, industry doesn't pay attention.
Exactly.
That is
Basically,
what
so-
happens.
Looks like that now wants to get entertainment.
Exactly.
So, good morning, everybody. We are then going to start this plenary panel session on smart connectivity. I hope they put my slides in the screen. You can put my slides on the big screen. Okay, perfect, thank you very much. So we have the panel on smart connectivity, and the objective of the panel is to do some scouting on the future of communications in the years 2021-2027. Now, ICT represents 5% of European GDP with close to 600 billions. The forecasts of its evolution are very, very relevant. We think that the machine-to-machine or IoT market will imply 4 trillion to 11 trillion by 2025. This is figures by different reports. The 5G-based European digital market will contribute over 4 billion to the European Union economy. And different technologies like supercomputing, machine learning, blockchain, and others will imply more demanding requirements on the network. So the networks are going to be even much more stressed than ever. So we will have to do new solutions. In order to begin looking to the future, we did the very interesting summit of Vision for Future Communication in Lisbon. And after that, together with the overall industrial and academic community, including industry and SMEs, we produced the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda 2021-27, together between Network 2020 and 5G Industry Association. The panel today is intended to discuss over this future of communications, and we have very excellent and top experts, both from industry and academia. From the telco side, we have Dr. Diego Lopez from Telefonica Research. Among many achievements, he's a high-level expert group of scientific data infrastructures by the European Commission, and he's very active in standardization bodies like in ETSI ISG for network function virtualization, and the NFV research group in IRTF. He's also very active in academic publication, and he's published over 100 papers. So thank you very much to Dr. Diego Lopez for being here today with us. Our second panelist will be Professor Serge Fdida from Sorbonne University. He has also a very long research career in networking, and he's currently leading the Equipex FIT, which is a very large-scale testbed for future Internet of Things. He's published numerous scientific papers. He is also co-founder of startup Cosmos Company. He has been appointed Vice President for Europe and International Affairs at Sorbonne, and he has been very active in promoting European infrastructures to do research in ICT, which are very much needed. Our next panelist from industry, the heading is wrong. Sorry about this. I just realized the heading is wrong. So it's Dr. Werner Mohr from Nokia, Germany. So the heading is totally wrong. I apologize for this, Werner. This was a last-minute substitution. You've probably seen that in the panel information, there was another person that was intended to come, but couldn't make it at the very last minute. So we have invited Werner Mohr. So I apologize for this, this mistake in the heading. So Werner Mohr graduated from Hanover in Germany. He has been active in lots of EU projects, and he's best known for having one of the main drivers of 5G in Europe. He was the first chairman of the PPP. He was the first chairman of the industry associations. He was the chairman of the ETP, and he has been, along these last 5 years, the driving force, I would say the engine, the leader of 5G development within Europe. He's also an author of books and has received many prizes. I would like to highlight the IEEE Communication Society Award for Public Service in the field of communications, together with IEEE Koji Kobayashi Award, on my view, is the top awards you can get in the world in networking, either the Koji Kobayashi or the Communication Society Award for Public Service. I think he's really deserving it, of course. And the last but not least panelist is Professor Dimitra Simeonidou from Bristol University in the United Kingdom. She's full professor at Bristol. He's the director of the Smart Internet Laboratory. Chief Scientific Officer of Bristol is open, which is probably one of her best-known projects. She is the brains and the spirit behind Bristol is open, which is a very well-known testbed. And she also has had industrial experience. She's co-founder of 2 spin-off companies out of Bristol Venture Capital funded, Saeta Networks, delivering SDN solution for enterprise. A very brief presentation about the chairman, which is myself. I'm director of India Networks, which is an international research center in Spain, in Madrid. I'm professor at University Carlos III. I'm the vice president, it's another mistake, the vice president of Photonic Laboratory, and I'm chairman of the expert advisory board of Network 2020 ATP. Now, what we are going to address in this panel is this future of communications organized in 5 questions. And each of the panel members will give their own answer to these 5 questions. So which one is, what will be the key technological elements of this smart connectivity concept? What is going to be the control and data planes of these smart connectivity systems? What will be the radio characteristics? Because obviously a very substantial part will be wireless, for sure. What will be the challenges for widespread development? So it's not the deployment, so it's not only the technology, it's also about the market and about the business. And when we say widespread, we are not talking only in Europe, of course. What we want is that our industry are world leaders. So what we would like to see is that our industrial companies perform deployment of all this technology throughout the world, both as manufacturers or telcos. And finally, what will be this role of our European companies academia in this globalized market? So I have underlined 10 minutes for each panelist, because then we need to have some time for the audience and for questions, and we'll go by alphabetical order. So first one will be Professor Serge Fdida.
Should I start from here?
Oh, sorry, first one is Diego.
Okay,
So
good.
shall I start? Okay.
I can give it for Telefonica if you want.
Well, if you want to join Telefonica, we
We
can
didn't see the
we can
slides, by the
exchange.
way.
Sorbonne doesn't look like a bad place to work anyway. So well, basically, when talking with Arturo, who I thank for inviting me, it's about the smart connectivity and the questions that we have. When the first thing is about thinking what smart means. And if you look in the dictionary, smart has 3 good senses. And well, the 4th and the 5th, that is hard and strong. That probably is not what we want to make with the network, but for sure we wanted to make it not only intelligent, but fast and agile, and well, why not stylish and nice to use by the network users. So basically, with this in mind, I don't know where here. With this in mind, I have prepared these slides precisely addressing the questions that were shared by Arturo with us. I hope that you can see, yes, here it's much bigger than in my, on my screen. So the idea is about the key technology elements. As you will see during the discussion, I don't consider myself an expert in radio. I always, when people ask me about radio, I always repeat that I remember there was someone called Maxwell that has something to do with this, not much more than this, so I prefer to exclude radio technologies in here. But basically, as the Dilbert's boss says, it's about hardware and software. It's all that we need, no more technology elements. With this, everything is done. Basically, when it comes to the, the key element for any future network, in my view, has to do with the recent development of the software networks. Whatever you call it, you can call it SDN, that was the first one that appeared. You can call it NFV, that is one of my babies. Or you can start thinking about the new SD1, SDR, intent-based networking, or whatever comes after. And as I said, this is essential base, the substrate for everything that will happen, and will be able to make the network smarter. That is now I'm providing a fast, intelligent, and stylish services to users. What is important is we're talking about software, and software implies something that here in networking we tend to forget. this is something that reminds me, this week I've been discussing with some colleagues that are participating in the ITF about a proposal we have made, and that it were heavily criticized by other participants because it left too many options open. And one of the arguments I use is precisely that it was leaving too many options open because it was software-based. And you could precisely make decisions during the implementation phase that are that don't necessarily have to be fixed during the architecture or the specification phase. And this is something that many people in networking, or many of us, have to realize, and we need to apply. Second, as a natural consequence of the application of software networks, is this concept of orchestration. Call it whatever you want. Call it, in the good old days, we started to call this the operating system, the network operating system. But apparently, till the guys in California decided to go that way, it was not catchy enough. So we started talking about orchestration that allows, and this is something that is important, because when we're talking orchestration, we're talking about how to organize all the elements that need to be used for operating the network, and that does include this multi-layer. We're not talking about the communication itself, we're talking about how the elements for making the network possible are, and you have to make it multi-layer and holistic. And is important, something that we have to achieve as well, which is about the separation of concerns. It's about that you can really abstract what you're doing, how you're doing it, and provide powerful abstractions that can be useful for achieving this orchestration. On the other side is, let's say, the things that have more to do with the smartness, not with the basic elements. One is applying closed-loop control is something that we have started, and this is very well known in automation in general. We're talking about applying the same automation principles that now are common in the industry to the network industry. Second is about data-driven management. These days, I was playing a quiz with myself about how many times I heard the word AI, mostly in the plenaries, about the future, the next frontier, and there were quite many times that I was cited the AI. AI is not only about AI, it's not only about machine learning, it's about data or evidence-driven management, and what is important is that we have very careful about the data flow. Think that the smartest controller can be completely fooled by poisoned or erroneous data, and this is something that we have to be very, very careful with. And finally, in general, the theory of distributed systems, we need to make evolve this theory and align it with the needs for orchestration and the needs for these abstractions. Planes. I'm thinking about the planes, and we're trying to avoid to play this network engineer that is so easy to understand. Well, the idea is that we have to evolve into something, a data plane that is fully programmable and is aware of the orchestration mechanisms, and where we are able to do something for composing the different data planes and the different elements in the data plane and go beyond tunneling. If you think about it, everything right now in the networking space is solved by a tunnel. Whenever you have a problem, you build a tunnel, you build an overlay, and an overlay on the overlay, and an overlay that composes overlays, etc. Is a technique, but I would not call it a very much scientific or even engineering technique at all. We had to guarantee security. Not only security, but trust. And this is more important. It's about having channels that are secure and attested. To do so, maybe we should try to challenge IP. IP as the one-size-fits-all protocol. I'm not saying that we have to forget about IP. I'm saying that probably we will have to make IP evolve in certain directions that support properties that were very adequate for email or web browsing or even video on YouTube, but that will not be enough for a smart network able to support other services. And that includes, why not, start thinking about protocol obliviousness and having smart mechanisms processing the packets individually. The control plane has to be composable. Most of the thinkable service in the future will include several administrative or control domains. We need to find a way of dynamically compose control plane elements, and this is something that has not been achieved yet, and to explore how the different security and trustability can be established and rely very much on intent and the way in which a high-level abstractions. Well, why not? Start thinking, if data is essential, we need to start thinking on a monitoring plane in which we can guarantee provenance and integrity of data. Radio. Again, here I feel very much like the pointy hair boss. I think that radio is always the easy thing. You just unplug the wires. Where is the difficulty in not having wires? So this is intentionally briefer, because the only thing when it comes to the radio characteristics and the only demand I have, or the requirement for the smart connectivity, is precisely to think that we have to think on a completely converged network in which the only difference is precisely the technology that is using for the devices to access the network, and to provide consistent orchestration and provide the necessary abstractions to support real end-to-end management and end-to-end usage of the network. And for sure, and that includes, and I know that this is challenging, and this is something that there are very serious differences in the way in which the different media behaves and all the like, but it's something that I believe is essential for achieving a real smart connectivity that is, as any kind of connectivity should be end-to-end. Arturo asked us about challenges as well, and well, I have, this is two columns instead to, on the one hand, the basic technical challenges. On the right-hand side column, you have the more managerial or even cultural challenges. Scale is about the scale. We are talking about extremely pervasive, in the future, extremely pervasive networks of a size that has nothing to do with the current internet that it appears to be even very big to us. And we're talking about a much wider scale. The convergence of the different paradigms. Right now, there are still some discussion between SDN and NFE, or NFE is better than SD1. SD1 is going to kill EVN because IBN that doesn't make sense, things like that. And this is something that we have to make a convergence the same way in the different software general categories. There is a convergence. Something that is important is that we have to bridge the gap, making a continuum, this continuum of solution, that is no longer the IT guys and the network guys. Everybody will be using software, programmable, smart, well-orchestrated, well-abstracted resources, whether they are part of the network or they are part of the computing. Security is essential. Security is essential, and believe me, security is essential for this to happen. We need proper abstractions, how we model the network, how we model the properties of the network, how we manipulate those properties in a consistent way, the same way we have now powerful abstractions, for example, for modeling data representations, databases, or even computing mechanisms. Well, finally is the dialectics, which is something that is, I like to illustrate the idea of this idea of Hegel about the thesis, the antithesis, and the need for a synthesis, is that we have to take into account that the networks are and will continue being heavily shared resources with many different competing, with users with many different competing goals, including their administrators. And we have to find ways, if we want to have a smart connectivity, we have to find ways of in a smart way, how to combine and reconcile those requirements to make the usage fair and stable. On the other hand, how we deal with the management, etc., how we think more in terms of frameworks than architectures, how we are more flexible, and how we keep these implementation choices, the idea that open source and standards are different, that I contend very heavily, but many people believe that they are different, completely different things, when I believe they are different flips of the same coin, is something that we have to make, if even in the case that I'm right, in my view, that there is a need of making the general community aware of this. the industry of the networking, the culture of the industry, the networking industry has to change. This is, we cannot rely any longer on heavy standards and long development cycles, long economic cycles, RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, and all the process. We have to change it and become much more agile. And to become much more agile, someone has to do something with regulation. Regulation cannot be any longer based on basically two principles, which is high taxation on only the network operators, and including the spectrum auctions, and second, on rigid architectures that are precisely because they are regulated, they don't allow any possibility of differentiation of operators or services. Most of all, we had to make the whole thing sustainable. We had to make this has to be an appealing business. Because if you don't make money, if there are no way of taking benefits, not only social, but directly economic, and there is no way of paying my salary, among other things, well, networks will have a problem to become smart. Finally, about the European role, precisely what we would like to avoid is that something that is quite usual recently to our despair in many so-called technological firms, which is that, well, you don't know, even you are allowed to watch how the subcontractor of the subcontractor of the subcontractor is doing the real thing. We need to be aware that there are very few industries, if you think about that are in which we keep a European leadership, and telecommunications in general, in the provision of devices and in the provision of services is one of them. And we should think about that is almost a national need for to keep it, this leadership. We have to be aware that the smarter we make the network, the faster the limits between the different elements on the network will be. So that implies that network service providers will be able to provide other kind of services, but it's the other way around. People that so far has been at the application level can start thinking about the network. And that implies as well manufacturers, integrators. It's not only the operators, it's the whole ecosystem. For sure, there is a need of further research. We are just scratching, and these are some musings about how we see things right now. Maybe in 2-3 years, we'll be talking about things completely different. And if somebody, maybe Arturo, invites me to come again, I will say, well, remember 3 years ago, I was completely wrong. I was telling you that this was important. It was by no means. And we need to help to cross this death valley from research to the real product. Is something that is essential. From time to time, you believe that whenever you prepare a research proposal, you are very much asked about, show me the impact, show me the application, show me the exploitation. And in many cases, what you're doing is precisely applied research. We have to be smarter. We have to be smarter in finding how to move from applied from research too close to products, and in this I would strongly advocate for fostering as much as possible applied research. Well, I think that we need to rethink the model on how EC-funded programs are evaluated, reviewed, which are the, and this is something, well, that I keep saying, and I guess that many of us keep saying, we have to refine the model, make it more efficient. And well, something that makes me think is about this, just a final reflection that is probably is that not all the innovation comes from the startups. And in some cases, this startup frenzy about creating startups is something that is somehow making certain kind of innovation complicated. Because what you build is a small group of people very much focused on a single product. If they are successful, normally they are bought out by a big multinational, because that's the business model, and this is the desirable fate of such a startup. And in some cases, this goes precisely against innovation itself. Again, I'm not saying that I have the solution for this change of the models, and just highlighting that there were some problems that we had to rethink it if we want to achieve it.
Sorry. Next is you.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
So, good morning. This is with great pleasure that I'm participating to this panel. Thanks for Arturo for inviting me. Unfortunately, I could not come earlier and enjoy the conference. So, for you, this is the last mile. So I decided that you might be a bit tired, and I will make it very short. This I promised to Arturo, and very simple. Because the questions, of course, are very broad, and each single question is really asking for a long discussion. I don't know whether you recognize this building. It's actually a very nice museum in the south of France that was designed by a famous architect, Rudy Riccioni. And it was made possible, this very particular shape was made possible because of very innovative development in cement and concrete. And if we look at the key technologies, so it's clear that they will power smart connectivity. And I'm not going to touch base on those. And it was mentioned by Diego. I'm sure that they will be also highlighted by the other panelists. So be it regarding IoT or wireless, like all those aspects related to massive MIMO and so on and so forth, SDN, NFV. And if there is a problem I don't know how to solve, I will throw machine learning at the problem. It's driven by technology, but it's powered by technology, but it is driven by services and application. And I think the very important aspect now is the scalability of the application, because what you want to achieve is a policy-based application path selection in real time. And that's really very critical. So for me, the really key problem is the supporting architecture to cope with the latency, storage, and computation. And this is about being in a position to leverage the benefit of the cloud and the capacity of the network. So as you can build an agile, as it was mentioned, an extensible digital infrastructure. I think it doesn't make any sense today to separate what is designed by those big cloud providers and what is going to be the future of digital infrastructure. So this is about the right level of abstraction for the architecture, and I think it's a very, very difficult problem. Second is about the control and data planes. So for those who know me, I've been involved in the design of test platforms since many years. And at the international level, we have been struggling about the control plane. So what is the right control plane? Basically to be in a position to select the resources and organize the resources in a way that you can push an experiment. And at the end of the day, what is obvious is that we will have to face many different control planes. And the concern is about how we can continue to work with those control planes so that we can enable not only the development with real current technologies, but also with future technologies. If I look at the edge, long time ago, 10 years ago, Arturo was there as well. I gave a talk in a joint COST NSF workshop with the topic was the network is a database, which basically was criticizing the principle of unicast communication, which is the foundation of most type of services in the internet or in the telephone network, and advocating for publish-subscribe services. Because if you look at the edge, basically what you want is to disconnect the sender from the receiver because of mobility and because also of the developing application that you see within the enterprise. And I believe that this is going to be a very important control plane at the edge as a support for IoT, as a support for mobility, and we see it already being developed. In the core, now I believe that what we need is a distributed control plane. a distributed control plane that will provide an environment, as I said, that will be in a position to work with those different control planes that will continue to exist. And this is going to be, in my opinion, organized as an overlay. Because the value of an overlay is that, again, you can deploy it. You don't have, as Diego mentioned, to wait 10 years for the standardization or the regulation to happen. You can just make it. You can make it scalable, you can make it extensible, and you can use the different technologies that are under deployment today. The radio characteristics, again, as I said, I'm not really concerned about the development of the different technologies at the edge because it will happen. There are tons of smart people all over the place that are working on those very specific technologies just to push the envelope in capacity, but also with respect to extensibility and so on and so forth. So we know that we have to cope with on-demand. That's the most difficult part. On-demand, we have to match the resources with the demand in a way that is really scalable and extensible. Again, if I come back to the architecture, it was mentioned by Diego, the three main challenges, we know what they are. So scalability, this is going to be supported by the cloudification. The agility, we believe that the only way to achieve this is through the softwareization. And to cope with the mission-driven, the critical time-sensitive application, we need to push the edgeification. So, but again, the right level of abstraction is really the difficult part. So the support from the edge will come with different kind of technologies, dynamic to cope with on-demand, diversity. The very important point for us is how we can really benefit from all the technology that exists at the edge. So for instance, many years ago, we started to consider offloading because we believe that Wi-Fi was actually a benefit for the cellular, and this is going to happen in other cases. Dense, massively dense, and that's a very difficult problem with respect to information and signal theory. So this is well known, I will say. My take is that device to device is going to become very, very important. The technology is happening slowly but surely, I mean in LTE, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth and others, and it can really shape very nice properties. So I really believe that this is going to be a major take in the future. Smart connectivity deployment. I believe that the network will disappear. So don't take it wrong. It doesn't mean that there will be no network in the future, but that the network is going to be basically completely embedded in the services. So it could be the verticals. I guess Arturo has mentioned this in his introduction. It could be based on the services and application, but it's going to be seen as an enabler, but also as a cost if you sell it as is. And I believe that the network will disappear and will be shaped in the services. So of course, if you want to achieve this, one point that Diego mentioned is that the management is going to be key, because if you want that the network will disappear, it means that you know how to manage it in a way which is completely, which will make this network and resources transparent. And the orchestration is going to be a key component. The role of the European companies, if I mimic our President Emmanuel Macron, I will say that I am positive, but I'm also negative at the same time. I'm negative because I really see an uptake of the cloud providers. What they do today is that they have massive cloud distributed all over the place in many important locations, tens of them, connected by big pipes, very fat pipes. And with this, you can really shape an infrastructure, a digital infrastructure that is able really to capture not only the traffic from the enterprise, but also the traffic from the customers, the end customers. And this you can deploy. So you mentioned the SD-WAN, but yes, that's certainly an interesting development, because you don't have to wait for regulation, standardization, and so on. And you can certainly have a very nice transitioning from what is existing today to services that are pretty fast to deploy and that you engineer in a way which is completely different paradigm from what has been done with the legacy. I can take the example, for instance, not to talk about the big Google and so on, but if you take a small company like VeloCloud that has been acquired by VMware, what they're trying to do today is exactly going into this direction. So again, it's very pragmatic. I'm happy to see that Telefonica is pushing or advocating for rethinking the model. So that's really nice. But we need to provide opportunities for developments that will really create some noise and take some risk with respect to the streamline that is developed by the standardization bodies. And this to happen, certainly we have to rethink the model. And to close, because I promise that I'll be on time, I believe that maybe for the academic community, but not only, we need to continue to push for tools to support the design of those scalable, trustable, robust digital infrastructures. I think it's critical for education because you need talented young fellows to support what you design. So that's very important for education, but that's very important as well to incubate new ideas and push the envelope so that we can really test whether there is an opportunity for those kind of developments. So I'm not very optimistic, honestly, unfortunately, for the, let's say, networking companies, but I believe there are very important opportunities so that we can make the network disappear behind the services and the verticals where I believe that there are very important opportunities for Europe. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I try to answer the questions mainly from the perspective of the NetWorld 2020 ETP, where we have developed a research agenda towards Horizon Europe. And I think there we have already collected quite some information which are addressing the questions which we have. From that perspective, we see the smart connectivity as a key enabler for the overall network, which is of course also addressing other areas. There will be more data analytics. We have cybersecurity. Security has to be built into the connectivity. We have the discussion high performance computing. All of that needs exchange of data. And that, of course, as Arturo said in his introduction, requires networks which can cope with these challenging requirements. Of course, these systems will be more and more software-driven. That provides a lot of flexibility, but of course also a lot of challenges. And in this sense, we see that the communication infrastructure is a nervous system of the future communication, which we will see. And it's not something where we can say everything is already invented, we don't have to invest in that anymore, we don't have to do research. From our perspective, there is still a lot of need to continue the research in this domain, because when we look at that, all kinds of devices will be interconnected. We have to provide high availability, we have to provide low latency, very high capacity. These are big challenges ahead. What are the key enabling technologies and requirements? The future networks are not simply the communication technology or the access or the transport. There are much more activities on software technology. Artificial intelligence will be part of these systems, for example, for network management, and cybersecurity as built in. Therefore, these smart connectivity systems will be more and more a combination of different areas which were somehow investigated more or less independently in the past or until now, but we have to look at this more from a holistic perspective. And this, on the right, gives you some impression from the research agenda in Networld 2020. I have only taken out some topics related to the connectivity part. We have to continue in radio technology and signal processing. Already during this conference, there were quite a few sessions addressing parts of these topics. Then optical communication also still continues. We need this for transport and for the backbone networks for all the access points. In this sense, the network may not disappear. Maybe it's a different model, but we will still need, of course, a physical infrastructure also in future. Then we have to look at how satellite systems can complement the terrestrial networks, what is their role. And of course, we also have to look at future and emerging technologies, and what currently is on the table are nano and bio-nano things and networks, which is of course for very short range, but for sensor type systems and many new applications. Control and data plane. Here I've mainly looked at the activities towards network slicing. This is taken from NGMN. And the basic idea here is to provide flexibility, to support many different application domains based on the same physical infrastructure, but to provide parallel virtual networks, to have a separation between control and data plane. And the reason for that is that both planes can be scaled independently and that functions can flexibly be distributed in the overall network. There, still a lot of research is ongoing, how we can really implement that. Yesterday afternoon in the panel, there were some concerns raised on network slicing, and I think that also indicates this discussion is not finalized today. Concerning the radio characteristics, here I would like to look more from a generic point of view. When we look at frequency spectrum, I would say in the more reasonable frequency bands for mobile and wireless communications, which are the low frequency bands, spectrum is quite exhausted in the meantime. Therefore, we have, of course, these discussions in 5G to go to millimeter wave, or now what's investigated is to go to the terahertz domain. That means going up provides new opportunities, but of course there we see huge technical challenges, how to implement that, how to achieve a reasonable range, that these systems can be deployed also under economic conditions. Then antenna technology, of course, will play an important role to mitigate some of these impacts which are coming from radio propagation. And what, of course, helps to increase capacity is to build the networks more and more dense. Why are we doing this? Basically, we are looking for infinite or seamlessly infinite network capacity. 5G is a step towards that, but this development will, of course, continue. Then the latency. It was also mentioned before. Many applications, especially in the industrial domain, require low latencies. Then we will see a massive amount of things, of devices, IoT. That is a scalability issue. It's also a security issue, especially when more and more critical infrastructures in our societies depend on ICT. Very short-range communication will be part of that. That could also be, for example, in the health domain, sensors for a lot of parameters from the human body. Then global reach, which means we want to use these systems not only localized, we want to use them as widespread as possible. Then for the operation of these systems, we can imagine these systems will become more and more complex. Therefore, cognitive operations by means of artificial intelligence and machine learning will help that we can operate these systems in future. And then, of course, security. We are becoming simply more and more dependent of these systems, and therefore security has to be inbuilt from the very beginning. Widespread deployment. I have here more a technical look, what it basically means. And also a more generic consideration, independent of the radio system itself. When we simply assume that we have a cellular network to provide the coverage, then of course we always have to deal with propagation. This is a generic propagation law which shows the dependency from range and from the carrier frequency. And this we can translate also in some relation between the throughput or the bandwidth of the system and the carrier frequency and the number of access points we need to provide full area coverage. And that basically means if we increase the throughput or the bandwidth, basically the range is going down. If we keep the antennas the same and keep the transmit power the same, if we increase the carrier frequency, we see the same, the range is going down, the number of access points is increasing, and that means we have a quite significant economic impact. Therefore, antenna systems, multi-antenna systems, MIMO concepts are very important because there we are able to either increase the range by beamforming, or we can theoretically increase the capacity linearly with the number of antennas, because in all the other diversity schemes, the capacity is only increasing logarithmically, which is not providing huge gains. But the basic message is, if you go for higher throughput, if you go for higher frequencies, basically the economic impact is becoming bigger. And that provides, of course, big challenges, and we may not be able simply to overcome that because these are simply laws of physics we have to deal with. Yeah, what's the role of companies, academia? Of course, that we also put in our research agenda. We will support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and many of them can only be supported by means of ICT. From the company perspective or from the industry perspective, and here I'm more talking from the manufacturer side, we as manufacturers are of course serving the global market. We are not isolated in Europe or in a certain country. We are looking at the global market. And the impact we have there is to do research, development of future systems and solutions, to generate IPRs, build up know-how, which is important to keep our societies running, also to keep growth and wealth in Europe. We are contributing and shaping international standards. And we are, of course, also supporting the cooperation between different industries, between the ICT domain and also vertical industries to support the digital transformation. When we look at the academic domain is also part of a global community. There are a lot of relations, contacts, cooperations across the world, and therefore we are all living and contributing to these global activities. which is also very helpful for us because everyone has good ideas. We have to come anyway to agreements when we go to standards, and therefore we need this global cooperation. And in this sense, of course, European companies and academia play an important role in the global ICT development. However, we have also to be aware we are challenged in Europe, we are in global competition, and we cannot simply say we are so great, everything is settled. And therefore we have to increase investment in research. We shouldn't say this is all done, and therefore Horizon Europe is very important that we continue this success story. I think Diego Ziu mentioned that industry is still strong, but this is something where we have to work for. It's not simply for granted forever. Yep. And we have, of course, also to follow global developments, and if models are changing, we have to look at that, how they are changing, how do we adapt ourselves, or how do we shape these changes. But in this sense, I think we are still in a good position, but it's important that we are continuing in Horizon Europe, because this development will not simply stop. Thank you very much. Dimitra?
Yes, I need Right, so I come last, and much it has been said, so I have the duty to not to repeat, but also say something new and memorable. That is going to be quite a challenge after such a great set of speakers. Thank you, Arturo, for actually inviting me in this panel. So I start with this diagram and this slide, and I use this slide for the last 5 years. So from the beginning when we start as a community, and I come mainly from the optical networking community, to actually lobby our position with the whole 5G agenda. And the reason that I use this diagram is every time I go, I change only the small writing in the different boxes just to check how far we have come and how much we comply with original vision. So technological elements for smart connectivity, and all of this is still very relevant, network of networks. And that was exactly what was the big vision at the beginning of the whole 5G discussion, that is not only radio, it's everything else. And I think we have gone quite far, for instance, on addressing how we bring together radio and optical and cloud, but there are some other new things that are emerging. For instance, the digital vertical sectors. We talk a lot about verticals, and we're just about to see a new, for instance, call, which is going actually to fund verticals and trials. The reality is that these guys are going faster than anybody else. So there are actually a lot of 5G networks trials that are appearing, for instance, driven by arenas, driven by Stadia, driven by transport operators, especially around the rail. So what is the position when we are looking network of networks? We are going to have the common network as we understand it, seamless, for instance, convergence across different elements, but where these digital vertical sectors that they are going to be operating their own networks are going to fit. Just to remind you, and I'm going to address this a bit later on, these networks are mostly going to be independent. And the only dependency that they're going to have with MNOs probably is going to be a spectrum dependency if they actually do not choose to go directly and fully for a licensed spectrum. So this is something that is a technological element that we need to consider in the future of smart connectivity. The second one is technology and vendor agnostic. And we talked a lot for many years, for instance, about 5G, and we said, okay, this is going to be probably the last G. Why? Because this is technology and vendor agnostic. And we all felt comfortable, or personally I felt comfortable about this, because I said, I really don't have the appetite to go for a full another G, I see now new programs coming around 6G. What the difference is going to be? A new bit of radio? These new bits of radio, they should fit in an overall architecture that we are actually, a holistic architecture that we are actually developing right now. And let's take a little bit more lessons from the optical networking world. When we bring a new fiber, we don't actually define a new generation of networks. It fits with the overall architecture. It brings more capacity, probably more flexibility, but simply fits. So are we doing something that actually is going to be there to last? And if we find a name for another generation of mobile networks, let's not go to 6. Let's actually be a little bit more imaginative about this. Commodity hardware, we all talked about white boxes. Many of us were advocate about open hardware and bare metal. How far this story has gone? I think very few steps have been taken. What is the commercial model, for instance, for commodity hardware for white boxes? At least I can say from Europe, we haven't moved this agenda very far. And then when we are looking about smart, and Diego made quite good points about this, customized and automated is a big thing. So we talked about programmable networks, and of course there are new technologies now. Everybody's talking about AI and machine learning. I think AI and machine learning would have a place, but it's not actually what is going to make our network smart and programmable, not on its own, because for many, many years we actually do automation and end-to-end automation in our networks. So control the data plane. I personally think that we are going towards a world where actually network infrastructure is going to be a utility. If you are looking at the whole idea about networks of networks, and in the wider sense that I actually presented before, we have a number of challenges. For instance, extreme heterogeneity. Can we go from the IoT to the data center? What seamless convergence is going to look around this extreme heterogeneous environment, extreme granularity, from terabit per second, for instance, connectivity, down to bits per second for smart parking. Do all these belong into the same network? Maybe, we hope so. Multiple ownership. I mentioned before, you have the MNOs, and at the same time you have all these digital sectors, the enterprises, that actually they are developing their own networks. Is going to be a changing world. Agility and responsiveness, we need actually to be able to move in this environment, both in terms of technology adaptation, but also in terms of business model. And of course, we have to look at the problem at scale. So within my community and my team, we are looking actually at new ways of managing infrastructure and services. If you start thinking with this environment that I'm describing, you are looking at completely distributed and disaggregated environment. So you start looking actually at assigning atomic values to connectivity and compute. If you start thinking about this, network connectivity actually is not the valuable part of making the network. You can see actually the network connectivity acting as a backplane. So where the value comes in this new world, aggregation. We are all talking about slicing. I think very soon we are going to introduce a new word. I don't know if this is the correct, but probably splicing. Because what we start to look now is actually if connectivity elements, they have atomic values, we have to bring them together, we have to aggregate them in order to achieve actually complex infrastructure. I mentioned before automation, advanced monitoring. Diego actually mentioned about the monitoring plane and data, managing actually networks through real-time or historical monitoring data. That is going to be important, and probably around that management, machine learning is going to have some, not the defining one, but I think it's going to have an important role. And we are talking all the time about software. I think what we're going to need to actually see next is refocusing into hardware. So the role of open hardware, really open hardware, and can actually start addressing programmability at the hardware layers and start looking hardware machine learning, hardware-based machine learning, for example. And I'm talking about hardware. I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time, but just to give you an example, my team, I know that the time is going completely out of the window, but an example of an open hardware, we have an instantiation of this. I talked about backplane this is actually a backplane generalized converged node is sitting at the edge at the borders of a network, and the borders that is sitting is between your wireless connectivity, your IoT connectivity, your data center, or your digital enterprise. We have an instantiation on this, which we call it a 5G in a box. What it does, and we have demonstrated this, is actually does on-the-fly aggregation and heatless actually switch over between optical backhaul and wireless backhaul, for instance, between a millimeter wave and an optical service. And we have created this 5G in a box, open hardware, just actually to start advocating the role of hardware in future of networking. You have something like this, it's an FPGA and an optical switch. It can actually do real-time convergence between different wireless technologies, from Wi-Fi to 4G to 5G. We had a Li-Fi as well presence in our latest experiments, and allocate an optical service. Or it can switch between, as I said, fiber backhaul and millimeter wave backhaul. Where do we use it? We are doing pop-up 5G networking. So you take this actually open hardware, you place it in a station or in an arena where there is a fiber presence, you're actually able to manage wireless connectivity dynamically to the end users and to audiences. So this is an example of what I mean. The value of hardware in the future of smart connectivity is quite important. And it can be cheap, it can be generic, it can be fully transferable. Now, talking about wider deployment, and we talked a lot about technologies. Business models are very, very important. There is a project here that is presenting 5G City that is advocating neutral hosting. I think this is quite important. Are we moving in a world that actually neutral hosting is moving from site sharing actually to more deep sharing, even a spectrum sharing kind of environment? So neutral hosting, I think, because enterprises, because places, municipalities are going very much to drive 5G at scale in the next few years, I think neutral hosting we start to understand the usefulness and the business model about this. But it's not only host in a neutral way, it's have actually an open network so we can also foster innovation at the same time. So networks are not going to be only a service provisioning environment, but a truly innovation environment on their own. I talked previously about spectrum brokering, sharing spectrum. I think we are going to see new kind of service providers, of operators, spectrum brokering operators. And this is up actually to policymakers to allow this happen. I know that the conversation, for instance, is very open and very active in other parts of the world. So at the same time, what is the commercial model? I mean, we have to ask, we are opening up an environment. If we move away, and apologies, Diego, from traditional MNO operational environment, the service provisioning environment, what is the business model to go actually towards neutral hosting and spectrum brokering? And what that is going to be for the future, for instance, of the mobile market in Europe or beyond Europe. And I would like just to say, just focus on newcomers, new kids on the block, like the enterprises, logistics, and retail, because they are driving network deployment, they are driving services as we speak. And the danger is, and I say this to my own government in the UK, that the danger is you are throwing hundreds of millions to 5G research. In a year's time, you are going to see trials happening elsewhere, and these trials are going to be privately funded. And then what is actually the whole purpose and the whole scope of actually, if you like, publicly funding something that is going to move commercially very quickly? So what is the role of companies and academia? I think this is the role of everybody in this community. We are thinking technology a lot, and that's where we are, where we are. We start thinking about vertical sectors. But for me, so we're thinking about health, transport, for instance, creativity, manufacturing, and so on. For me, the next step is start thinking about cross-sector challenges. And cities, for instance, is a good place where you just start thinking how these sectors are going to interact with each other. Take a city, for instance, health, transport, creativity is relevant, environment sustainability is relevant, and I have another point there, living well. So well living is quite an important factor that we have to see how actually this is being delivered by a generalized smart connectivity. Business models. People talked about business models. For something actually to go ahead, it has to have a viable business model around it. For instance, at the moment, we still do not have business models, commercial business models for data. We definitely, the big question that we're getting about 5G is what the business models around 5G. So we need business models that they are agile, they are accessible, they allow new entries, and this is all about regulation and IPR as well. And let's not forget, and I'll close with this, the underlying social content. We're actually changing people's world with smart connectivity as we are implementing at the moment. So is actually innovation responsible? Is it ethical? Is it addressing the needs of citizens, of businesses, of SMEs? Is it inclusive? Inclusivity is very, very important. And also, let's start thinking about the future of work. We are making a lot of changes in the ways that people work. Gig economy is already, for instance, bringing quite a lot of legal challenges in terms of, for instance, labor rights. Can we actually innovate, provide networks that they take into account all these issues? And I stop here. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all the panelists for having adjusted to the time. We have, I would say, around 20 minutes for questions because we should finish at 12:30, so I think that's good. Before jumping into the question, I just wanted to do a flash of the next NGI forum that will be in September in Porto, Portugal. I think it's quite an interesting event that links with the topic of this panel. So, having said this, any question from the audience? There are two questions over there, so we can start first with one at the border. They'll get you the mic. And then there is second person to the
Okay. My name is Wenceslav Kafedžiski. I'm coming from University of Skopje, Republic of Macedonia.
Could you speak a
We
little
can't
louder?
hear you.
Yes, Wenceslav Kafedžiski from University of Skopje, Republic of Macedonia. Coming from academia, I would like to know what is your experience as 5G PPP, and we have two professors from academia and one panel participant from the industry. What is your experience with the Horizon 2020, the balance of the fundamental projects like FET, Future and Emerging Technologies, versus the platforms, demos, trials, etc.? And what would be the future horizon after 2020? What do you think, whether we should put more focus on fundamental research? Because even OFDM is coming just from capacity formula, and then NOMA is coming again from information theory. Do we need maybe some new fundamental approach totally to get more from the existing spectrum, the low band spectrum, instead of going to very high frequency terahertz, which limit the range, of course? Then we need very dense cells, versus having a lot of trials, demos, platforms, etc. What's your opinion?
Two professors.
A very short answer. Actually, the answer is in your question. I mean, if you were convinced, you will not be asking this question. My take on this is, and people who knows me know my position, is that I believe we don't take enough risk, we don't push the envelope enough. And we shape into direction that somehow are within a roadmap, which is, of course, nice to have. But I think that we lose the competition. And as was mentioned by Diego, yes, I believe we need to rethink the model with respect to the public-private partnership. We need to really add noise in the system. The noise will provide the opportunities. And also with the SME, of course, we advocate having SMEs in the loop, which I strongly support. but knowing SMEs is very hard. And there are only a few very, let's say, selected SMEs that contribute, often almost the same. So it's nice to have a coordination action to see what is being supported by the Commission, but we need to understand how we can add more noise. And I never thought that we need to oppose long-term thinking with pilots and experimentation and so on. I think both are complementaries and will support the development of the knowledge. For the future, I'm not sure how things will develop. I like the idea of mission-driven, but I believe that what will happen is that everyone will have certainly tons of mission-driven proposal in the drawer, and they can take everything they didn't support in the past and reshape it as mission. So if there is really a mission, it has to be ambitious, but then it has also to allow for noise to happen. Otherwise, there is no roadmap. I'm not sure what the mission, how the mission can be defined. But she has much more experience than me on 5G for the reason I just mentioned.
I don't know about this. I'm an optical networking person, so suddenly I'm talking everywhere about 5G. I think your question is more fundamental. It's about what's the role of academics in a PPP project. And this is actually a question that we are addressing in my team, quite often. And because as academics, we actually have to drive fundamental research and change that is actually much further than what a PPP project or a program is addressing. At the same time, we have a duty actually to create impact. And therefore, I think working with industry in a framework like 5G PPP, it is quite important because we bring some academic impact and we learn things where then we can translate into skills through our education and, and training and mentoring that we are doing within our universities and our teams. The other thing, of course, is requirement gathering. You have to understand what is the problem in order actually to suggest, if you like, a breakthrough solution, which it should come from academia. And I think in these programs, you understand what are the requirements, what are the needs of the industry and of the society, and therefore it can reflect within the fundamental research that we're doing. Is that answering your question? Okay, thank you.
Werner also wants to make some answer, and then unless Diego wants to comment, we would pass to the next person.
When we look at the framework program, there's one important criterion, impact. And that means the politicians are looking at what is at the end the economic impact of the investment in research. Do we get products out which are coming from Europe? Do we build up the know-how? Do we influence standards? And are these systems finally deployed? In this respect, it's maybe not fundamental research, very long-term research, but for Europe, it's a very important element. When we look at participation, we have now about 20% SME participation in PPP projects. About 50%, I don't have the exact figure, but in that order is industry, and the rest is going to the academic domain. That means the different stakeholders are quite well represented. And of course, the academics are more looking at the longer term issues, and industry is more looking at that what is now really needed. Therefore, I think it's a quite useful instrument to coordinate research, really to do the research. And when we look at the program, it's usually starting in phase 1 with some exploratory phase. And I'm now talking about the example of 5G PPP. Phase 2 is going more towards trials preparation, and phase 3 is going towards trials. Therefore, there is some value chain along the lifetime of the program, and there is a clear intention of Horizon 2020, and that is continuing in Horizon Europe, to go at the end closer to the market. but there are other parts of the program which are more looking at the basic research part, which was the excellent science in Horizon 2020, or I think it's called Open Science now in Horizon Europe. Therefore, these different elements are addressed by the overall research program, and I think there should be enough meat in for all the different stakeholders. Diego?
No, I'll pass on this.
Thank you very much, Diego.
So we have a little bit more time.
Next question, please.
Okay, my name is Monica Buscher. I'm from Lancaster University and the Public Safety Communications Europe Network. And thank you very much for a really inspiring set of directions and challenges, and I'm really happy that you ask, is it ethical? That's really a very good question. My question is twofold. So what do you think we need from user organizations, users, citizens, maybe also social sciences and the arts and humanities, to make applied research work and to make human smart connectivity? And the second part of it is, how are we going to get it? And if I may, I'd like to give 3 concrete examples of where I'm asking this and why I'm asking this. So in security, for example, 50 to 90% of security breaches are caused by human behavior. So how can we support human security practices, and what do we need from users to tell us or to show us what these practices are? Similarly, how do people, do people trust trustworthy systems? How do they do it? How can we get user organizations to tell us how this happens? And another related question is, how much does this matter? It's really difficult to get figures, but in 2004, 142 billion euros were lost due to ICT failure or failed ICT projects. So I'd really like to get your views on that.
Thank you very much. I would suggest maybe that Diego answers, because he's asking about the human factor and how to take the end customer. I guess it's more a telco that could answer this, but any other participant, of course, can answer. But I would say telco is very suitable for this.
I'll start. Well, in general, I would say that when you're a customer, you have a very direct way of influencing the market, that is precisely deciding to buy or not. But apart from that, seriously, and I'm focusing on that, if we're talking about user organization, etc., I think that this is something probably is a vertical that has been somehow neglected. But in that sense, it's saying that we are considering the automotive or the energy or the industry verticals, it would be, I would welcome to have some contacts with user organizations or human rights organizations or whatever that are willing to play the same game in research. But the same game, what I see that would be, from my point of view, difficult to somehow privilege certain associations or certain groups ahead of other associations or groups that are defending completely other legitimate interests. So those associations, I would welcome to have them as verticals for ICT 19. If you are aware of any of them, please put them in contact with us, because it would be lovely to come with an ICT 19 proposal in which one of the verticals would be dealing with, with human aspects. This is one thing. The second thing you mentioned about security. The problem for people to care more about security is that they had to really value the assets. In a society that doesn't care about making public, photos of them completely drunk, it's difficult to tell them you have to be more safe about it. So it's, let me say one thing. I guess that is much more than 50% of the security breaches that are caused by human. Then the point is that we don't dig deep enough, but that's another story.
Please.
Right. I think the only thing we can do at the moment, I agree with Diego, is taking humans as another vertical. I think this is fundamentally wrong, though, but it would take a very long time to make an intervention. So what we need to do is to start rethinking how we do digital innovation. because we do digital innovation on our own, engineers speaking to engineers, and then humans, sometimes they come and you say, oh, I have created this. How does this fit with what would you like to do? So when we are looking especially at our universities or even companies, what I would like to see is these multidisciplinary teams, that you have the engineers, you have the social scientists, you have the economists, and actually experts that are dealing with policy, and they start thinking innovation, which is human-centric innovation from the very beginning. So co-creation and co-production from the point that you actually conceive an idea is very important. And this is not only putting the teams, because we all now think in silos, change the way that we are educating our young people so they think horizontally, not only vertically. And then we are going to get somewhere. I think, but we're going to get somewhere in something like 20 years' time from now if we start now. But I think it's very important. For instance, we can do small interventions around responsible innovation, and we can do that, or we can start thinking about ethics and digital innovation now, and then start making bigger interventions. Maybe that should be another framework that the European Commission should actually fund. Educating the people correctly is very, very important.
Good.
I'm not suggesting this exactly, but you need intervention.
Okay. So unless Werner or Serge want to add something, we would have time for just one very last question. Any very last question? So Luis. No, you're not Luis. I saw you wrong. He's sitting by you.
Speak loud enough for the rest. I've been to 4 workshops in Europe this summer, and in each workshop there's been a huge amount of enthusiasm for 5G. And what my concern is that we don't disappoint, okay? And that if we want to make a success of 5G, we find a way of engaging all this enthusiasm that's outside the 5G community somehow, for them to participate. Because my opinion is that it's only when you involve the wider community that then you get real success in technology. And there are precedents that demonstrate that, you know, from the internet, from the app, and so on and so forth. So that's my question: how are we going to involve the wider community?
Who wants to take it? I may then. Oh, Werner. Werner, yes.
I think the wider community is already quite well involved. Look around how many people have smartphones here, using the internet, using all sorts of applications. I think people are not so much interested which technology they are using. They want to get certain services, and they want to get that in a good quality. There I wouldn't be too concerned that that would not be accepted. It may be an issue of cost. Is there enough benefit for the cost? That we have to see. But we are also targeting many different industries. That, I think, is a paradigm shift from LTE, 4G to 5G. LTE was still a system mainly addressing the wide community, and 5G is the first system which is really targeting also many vertical sectors. And there the question is, do we get the take-up there in short time? Maybe you can add something?
No, I'm happy with that.
Any more comments? Then I think we can close here, so we are on time and we leave enough room for the closing session. I would like to thank the panelists very much. I think it was most interesting. Thank you very much.
But I wouldn't be too, they're already involved.
I mean, they are not, it's because they don't.
Most people are using this stuff.
This is the kind of general question. What is this about the citizens?
Yeah, we had also yesterday this question or the statement, the systems with the odd systems are bad and the even systems are good. What is the statistic basis for it? Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Very nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. More than that, but this is what we have. Thank you very much. We haven't met before. I'm Moita. And I'm
The first generation was analog. That was going back in the 80s or even further back.
decades
ago. And then we got GSM. Yeah, maybe 3G, the step was not big enough. From GSM, it was GSM was further developed. And then 3G was designed. It was basically ISDN. Wireless ISDN. That was the idea. But that was end of the 80s. But then it came.
ISDN was out of fashion.
I guess technology developed maybe faster than people expected. But then LTE was a big step. But I think 5 years ago, big step.
Just one announcement. The session is not over, it's actually continuing the next session. So please don't leave. We are just thanking the excellent panelists now and actually continuing with the closing session immediately afterwards. And there are still some quite interesting things to be heard. So just stay with us for a minute, please.
Yeah, you can use statistics for any kind of relief as well.
Nie, ne se bom vrnil.
What do you mean? The panel was only noise. Usually, television is not loud enough. Yes, that is very true. That is very true. That's very true. Yeah, I think we are not at the end. So this development is continuing. And if you don't do it in Europe, someone else will do it. And then it's better to do it in Europe.
Peter, should I just leave it here for you?
There's more underneath.
And there's more if you need.
There's more underneath. Yeah. Like, not like this.
You can even take it there now.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the last session. This is the last session for this year's EuCNC. So just a little more of your attention. We have the final 3 speakers, but very interesting ones, all of them. I invite to the stage the first speaker for the closing session, who is also the host of the next year's EuCNC 2019, Narcis. Welcome on stage. This is the warm-up for you for next year, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Moja and Micha. You have done an excellent work, outstanding as what was said already. You had 2 ministers in the opening ceremony. I think I cannot afford with that. You know that in our country we are capable of changing our government in 1 week and changing the soccer coach the day before the competition. So I don't know what will happen in the opening. Probably we won't have 2 ministers, or maybe we will have an astronaut minister there. Thank you very much for the nice organization. Maybe people don't know that this requires a lot of time. The preparation of a conference like this takes many, many hours and starts very, very soon. So indeed we are working for Valencia since the last meeting in Oulu. So right after the meeting in Oulu, we started working on preparing the venue, thinking on the agenda, the size, etc. And I guess that you, Mocha, and Micha did the same 2 years ago. So I hope to handle this in 2019 to someone that will have time enough to prepare the 2020 edition. As you see in the slide, the new thing next year, a part of being in Valencia, where things will be, of course, different. The world is, thanks God, the world keeps being global, but still the cities and the persons and the places are different, so you can enjoy different things in Valencia compared to those in Ljubljana. But you see that the next year, the special thing is that we have the Global 5G event co-located. It's Monday and Tuesday for the Global 5G, and it overlaps on Tuesday with the EuCNC conference, which starts 18 to 21st. Well, for those I think everybody knows where Valencia is, but just in case, it's in the Mediterranean, it's just in the Greenwich meridian, so we are the reference for the time shift worldwide, and it's in front of Mallorca, Balearic Islands, and same latitude of Madrid. So that's in Spain, of course. And Valencia is well connected to the world. There are more than 40 direct flights to many European capitals. Not all are here. I see that, for instance, Moscow, Tel Aviv, Istanbul, Sofia, Argel, there are many others missing, but there are plenty of destinations. If you come from outside Europe, the best thing is not trying to go to Madrid and then to Valencia, but it's much better hopping in Paris, Zurich, Istanbul, wherever, London, yeah. And also we have a high-speed train to the capital, to Madrid, in 90 minutes. It's 350 kilometers and it takes 90 minutes only. The venue is the Congress Center. The Congress Center was awarded with the best World Congress Center in 2010. It's a building of Norman Foster, his famous architect, and has a lot of facilities, rooms, and it's a very nice place with a lightful area for exhibition and plenty of nice rooms for our meetings as well. And we will also be, by the way, this venue is quite close to the, have I skipped one slide, maybe? No, okay. The venue is very close to the city, and what happened here? I missed one. Well, my apologies. There is one slide missing. Okay, no problem. The venue is 7 minutes from the airport by car, and it's 15 minutes by public transportation to the city center. So you are in the city, very close to the airport, but also well connected to anywhere in the city and the seashore. We will also be a part of the conference in some other interesting places. You should visit, and we will make you be there at the sailing port, the seashore, or the City of the Arts and Sciences, amazing buildings from Calatrava and other famous architects there. So probably we will have something in these two places. And next is maybe that you can watch and have an insight of what Valencia could be. If there is something.
Do you still dream about when we were young and the world was our playground to claim? Everything seemed like a new gift just waiting for us to share. Do you still dream that we're falling in love for the first
Not
time
only by
again and again?
many other nice ones.
Walking on clouds with the sun in our pockets without a care. I open my eyes and I see you. You're there by my side all along. Do you still dream of the things that we've done and the things that we'll do up ahead? We're one in a billion, but still we're together by chance or fate. I open my eyes and I see you. You're there by my side all along. The smile on your face always tells me love.
We are not that close to Africa. It's a zoo. It's an open zoo. Don't mind. So that's what Valencia is about. It's a city in the Mediterranean, sunny, warm in many senses, and willing to welcome you next year for the EuCNC. And finally, let me highlight these dates, which are important for those of you planning to come with contributions, with papers, with workshops, tutorials, exhibitions, etc. See that the 8th of February will be the deadline for sending your proposals for the most of the scientific content of the conference, and there will also, of course, be later deadlines for posters and exhibition proposals. Take note of this. All the information has been printed in this year's program, and nothing else. Hope to see you all in Valencia next year and have a very big conference with the global 5G event together. Thank you very much. What happens now?
Narcis is not done yet.
Yeah.
So, as you probably know, the organizer of last year's event started the tradition to pass on the flag. So this is now the official second pass on of the flag of the conference.
Should we go better?
We have to go through.
Yeah. So now only it becomes a tradition because we are following it. Otherwise, it was the first time last year. So, Narcis, I've already inserted the dates in my calendar. I hope many of you as well. Wow. So. Looking forward to Valencia edition. I'm pretty sure you're going to do great job there as well. So all the best.
I learned a lot from your edition this year, so thank you very much.
You'll have all our help as well, if necessary.
Thank you.
So, best of luck.
Thank you, Michael.
So now we're actually moving to the second talk in this closing session. It's going to be by Jean-Pierre Bienaimé, Secretary General of 5G Infrastructure Association. So, Jean-Pierre, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, for this end of last morning, I will try not to be too long and not really making a wrap-up, but to highlight some points, some realizations of the 5G PPP and towards what we are going. At first, let's remind that this 5G PPP composes itself of 3 waves of projects. And here in EuCNC 918, we have the presence of phase 1, some phase 1 projects, and also, of course, most phase 2. And we can say that phase 1 has already got major achievement in various domains and contributed also to hundreds of contributions for the standardization process, with notably within 3GPP. Now, integration of verticals is a crucial point of phase 2, and we saw with the call for phase 3 and the session of yesterday, the day before yesterday, that phase 3 is now on a good track. Indeed, this phase 3 can be divided into 2 parts. First one being platforms, corridors, vertical pilots, 5G LTE, and we had the opportunity here last Tuesday to highlight the 3 new projects having successfully responded to the 5G end-to-end facility call, ICT 17, with 5GE, 5G Vini, and 5 Genesis. But we will have other ones, and particularly the advanced 5G validation trials across multiple vertical industries. The deadline is fixed to the 14th of November, and of course, we saw at the session that there were many interested candidates, and newcomers are, of course, welcome. But there is a second part in this 5G PPP phase 3 that deals more with international cooperation. First result always was reached with the EU-China 5G collaboration, ICT 22, with notably 5G Drive project involving some colleagues here. And we have still some projects with Brazil, with Beyond, with Taiwan, and so on. And these international activities, the international cooperation activity, is one of the, it's not specificity, but one of the strong points of the 5G PPP, since it gathers not only the governmental cooperation on a first step, with notably the agreements, cooperation agreements that are signed between the European Commission and the administrations and governments of those regions of the world, but also the second step between the industry associations, that is to say the 5G Industry Association with the other associations around the world, that may result in trials, EU, EU, China, EU, Taiwan, EU, Japan trials, whether it be via private trials or via the 5G PPP calls, as we have seen. Indeed, this just is an update of the work groups that are active in 5G PPP. At first, in the 5G IA orbit, more policy work groups on the left, and the international cooperation activity illustrates what I said just before, but also the more technical work groups under the umbrella of the projects, now project phase 2. And we saw we could see many of workshops and special sessions were conducted with many colleagues having there their booths or submitting papers and quite cutting-edge presentations. The projects definitely are the engine of 5G PPP, and it's important for that they are vertical projects, but it's important they cooperate in horizontal activities such as the work groups. And in phase 2, it's important that they are doing that, and we, at the level of the 5G PPP steering board and technical board, technology board, we are keen to make that happen, or let's say improve if needed. So I will just highlight some recent work groups or results. The first one, which is not exclusive of all what is done elsewhere, the first one being is a work group that will go on until first quarter of 2020 during the IMT 2020 evaluation process of the ITU-R. So under the coordination of Werner Mohr, this work group has been established and benefits from the cooperation of 4 projects. And it's quite important to assess the proposals that will be submitted by the candidates, including, of course, the 3GPP. End of last year, we had a certain number of independent evaluation group, including 5GIA group and ETSI for Europe. So we are one of the 2 European independent work groups, and you see that other regions of the world have also proposed some work group, including, for instance, India, that is a new recent partner of us. Second highlight would be with the architecture work group headed by Simone Redana, and it has recently produced in January a white paper, architecture version 2, update of the first white paper that was presented at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And phase 1, based on phase 1 project's final results, with the contribution, this work group worked with 16 projects of phase 1, which is quite nice. These phase 1 projects have established a pre-standardization consensus on various areas ranging from physical layers to overall architecture, network management, software networks, and contributed, as I said, to the progress in standards. To date, we have counted, and we put that in the hot progress monitoring report, 320 contributions from phase 1 projects to the standardization process, and 40 contributions from phase 2, which is quite a few. So just not going in the details of this very specialized and technical white paper of the architecture, I've just put here some points to be highlighted. At first, flexible network architecture, then network slicing, of course, emerges as a promising future-proof framework, adhering to the technological and business needs of various industries. Third, security architecture will be native, integrated native into the overall architecture. Then the support of verticals, which is of key importance, will be enabled also by flexible function, and the vision of network slicing will therefore satisfy the demand of the vertical sectors that request dedicated telecom services by providing customer-facing on-demand network slice requirements to the operators. Then I will not, let's say, detail, because this has been presented 2 days ago, notably in the 5G Verticals NICE panel. This automotive work group is headed by our colleague Michael Falgren. And just to be complementary from other associations such as the 5G AA, which, with whom we collaborate, we wished to have a complementary approach based on business models, scenarios. So this was highlighted in the white paper that was also presented in Barcelona. What are the main stakeholders in this new ecosystem, in this automotive ecosystem, and what could be at this stage first conclusions? First conclusion is that stakeholders' role need to be clarified. It's the beginning. Business models must be rethought, involving users actively and potentially rewarding collaboration between them. This has also to be further studied. What will be the money flow on a 5G highway, digitized highway? Key parameters and value estimations need careful study. The group has made assumptions, but it's only at this stage assumptions, but it has the merit to exist. And early engagement of OEMs and automotive industry needed. The point on which I will highlight also, it's not new, but it's evolving, constantly evolving, is the 5G Pan-European Trials Roadmap Strategy. This is a work group that was the coordination of which was begun by Werner, end of 16, and that is now coordinated by Didier Bourse. But rapidly, and this work group is directly linked to the 5G action plan of the European Commission of September 16. But we see that it's an evolving topic, and we have now six streams in this group. This has led to a third version of the roadmap that was disclosed mid-May in Austin at the Global 5G event. For instance, the 5G private trials is a gathering of all what is being done on a private basis, but also, and we have noted that as a request from the Commission, the public, public trials, for instance, the A9 highway in Germany, which is an important example of that. We have the trial cities, the flagship event UEFA Euro 2020, vertical pilots, of course, and the international trials cooperation, because this has an international prolongement, whether it be via private trials or H2020 calls. This chart you know, this is also part of the trials roadmap. This has the merit to recap the various deadlines, the various time frames of what is happening for 5G, and you will see that there should be a very nice coordination ending around 2020, 2021. Between the Pan-European trials with our events, but also the 5G PPP phases, phase 3 ending in 21, and also the 3G PP releases. The release 16 is expected, finalization, freezing is expected by the end of 2019. Last week there was the result of the completion of release 15, mainly for EMBB and standalone 5G NR. But of course, the full 5G vision will be provided by release 16, definitely. And also the IMT 2020 evaluation process with ITUR. Now, just perhaps a highlight on the importance of verticals. It's not new, but between the words and the practice, often it's not the same thing, it's not the same story. So definitely and it's what Europe thinks. It's perhaps not the position of US more targeting fixed wireless access in a first step, or Asia more targeting media high-speed applications in a first step. But Europe will more target the new ecosystem with industry automation, with autonomous vehicles, and also with health monitoring. So definitely we have to embark those verticals. Here this is just, it's not exhaustive of course, but there's a summary of some quotations from verticals illustrating their main needs in terms of what 5G has to bring. For instance, Leonardo insists on security, PPDR in critical infrastructures, Volkswagen in dynamic network slicing and predicted QoS, Peugeot PSA Group with V2X connectivity and hybrid architecture sensors and femtocells networks, and Bosch. We had a representative of Bosch 2 days ago, Andreas Müller, quite nicely illustrating the needs. So high reliability and low latency are the major requirements for this Industry 4.0. This shows that in our phase 2, in our 5G PPP projects, we are integrating strongly verticals. Since this is a table that is inside the Pan-European Trials Roadmap, that shows that out of 21-22 phase 2 projects, 16 phase 2 projects are integrating verticals in their consortia, in their partnerships. So it's a very nice step. And in Mobile World Congress last February, for instance, we organized 5 demos of 5G car, 5G city, 1 5G, 5G Monarch, and also 5G X-Owl. So we are in a good track for that. To strengthen this action at the level of the 5G IA board, we have created a dedicated a vertical task force, which is not targeted to duplicate what is being done elsewhere, but that will coordinate, that will boost what is being done in terms of there is a strategy document that has been created. We have defined some priority vertical sectors, such as media and entertainment, such as industry, such as automotive as a first priority, but also energy, health, and security, being public safety, being also defined. And there is a tracker document to trigger future top-down actions, And this document is a follow-up tool. We also intend, instead of, we have not the means to approach company by company, sometimes we do, but it's, let's say, much better to act horizontally and to cooperate with vertical associations, such as 5G AA for automotive, such as 5G Asia for industry, such as PSC and EXO for safety, with whom we have signed agreements, and also more horizontal associations, such as our colleagues of NGMN, ETNO, or GSMA. And this is an extract of the track tool to make a vertical cartography, mapping vertical use cases versus 5G function in a 5G PPP funded project is a quite useful tool. And I will just finish. It's not like Narcis. I'm not the host, Narcis, but nevertheless, it's the organization team with Luis, Narcis, Colin, other colleagues, David, Didier, and other ones. We have decided next year to co-locate EuCNC in Valencia with the 7th Global 5G event, and since we will only have from next year one Global 5G event with the other associations of the world per year, this will be quite important. And 2 days ago we were in meeting with Pierce O'Donoghue, Bernard, and Pavlos, and Pierce insisted on the fact that we have not to fail on this event. It will be of quite importance in terms of visibility and tools and brochures prepared in advance. So it's quite important. And finally, to go to the future, we are now in discussions with the European Commission cabinet and with to try to, let's say, influence what will be inside the next framework program FP9 and also in the next multi-financial framework, the MFF. And as it was shown by Werner in the smart connectivity and smart networks, we have defined this concept of smart networks being composed of all that deals with communication infrastructure and digital security and connectivity, not to be forgotten, absolutely not to be forgotten in the next FP9. And also, we do not ask necessarily the same 5G PPP number 2, but we find that the PPP format was quite efficient, and we would like that such a structure could be adopted for this 21-27 FP9 structure. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this status update on the 5G PPP activities. Is there any question from the audience for Jean-Pierre? No? Okay. Thank you. Thanks again.
Okay, then last but not least, the last speaker and the representative of the yearly and every year's supporter of this event, Mr. Peter Stuckmann from the European Commission.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I have the pleasure and the honor to be the last speaker of the conference. So I see we have still some critical mass in the room. That's really appreciated. And no one leaves the room before we are finished. I brought quite a number of slides, but you have to blame Bernard and Pavlos. I asked them, of course, I was not here the whole conference, so to send me some input for the key takeaways and so on. So I was flooded with slides, but I will promise I will go over it not too slowly. So, yeah, some closing remarks, some takeaways. I phrase it under delivering 5G. That's what is our mandate now for the next year still, to see 5G happening in Europe. And then also looking beyond, colleagues like Jean-Pierre already hinted and Werner before, what is the vision for the next framework, the multi-annual financial framework, and I guess you would be also curious to see what is coming up in terms of opportunities for you. Yeah, so some figures. Thanks a lot for the input from the local organizers here. So yeah, we are back to a big number of participants. That's really appreciated, and I think it's also linked to the quality of the content, of the organization, of the event, really top class. So 520 participants, it's really good. Also the breadth, it's very broad, so 47 countries registered, and also international, so 12% of those outside of the EU, A lot of papers submitted, also the papers, international partners not only hooked to European activities but also fully originating from non-EU. And a lot of exhibition booths, high quality booths. The space was perfect here, so I think we found the right level here for the exhibition. So we consider this as an international success. Sounds very global. Of course, 5G is global. But many thanks to the colleagues here, especially for the local team, also the TPC, Louis, and others that are really keeping up the quality of this conference. And thanks a lot for the nice dinner yesterday, which I was happy to attend. So some takeaways. We see 5G deployment on the horizon. What we actually saw in Barcelona at the Mobile World Congress is really, it's not anymore a dream or a hype, it's really there, products are there. And here we see, looking at the technical status and the technical achievements, it fed into the standardization, so release 15 now. We also see, of course, release 16 coming up, and the rails are set for the right things, we believe. We were a bit concerned some time ago, but we think it goes in the right direction so that we have, as Jean-Pierre put it, the full 5G promises coming reality. We are really into testing validation. We had this phased approach. There was an interesting discussion also in the previous session to see, should we do more fundamental, should we do more trialing? We have this roadmap-based research. We have also opportunities, we believe, in other pillars of the program, and also continue to look at what comes beyond. So I think we have a complementary approach that is suitable. On the spectrum side, a lot of work to be done. Of course, from your perspective, as RNI and program participants, important to know what are the bands we go for in Europe. That's one thing. Of course, from the member states, we're really pushing them and then try to coordinate them to come up with the right assignment conditions so that we have a European approach, which is key. Okay, these are the positive points, but then some things to look at still, of course. 5G promises, so indeed we are working on the vertical side, and it's not like switch this on 2020, deploy and go. I mean, this is vertical by vertical partnerships emerging. Not one size fits all, so it's a huge work. Some still to be worked out. Some partnerships now being launched in phase 3, especially. And this is also gaining some global momentum. I always believe that it's not like this region does this 5G, this region does this 5G. At the end, there are opportunities that will converge. Of course, we have the opportunities in Europe to have strong industrial sectors, so verticals is really key. But we always warn that we should not forget the other developments, that also we need this kind of scale for mobile ecosystems, mass devices and so on, needs to be considered very prominently. Automotive considered as a key use case. We saw very good examples here, so this is promising. And also some projects, as you know, will soon be launched, for especially the cross-border corridors where we see this strategy emerging concretely. And we also discussed quite a lot about the Industry 4.0 environments, which are also very promising. Some work to be done there also on the business models. We won't pick the business model, of course, in this setting here. It will be about opportunities to test out some aspects of business model, how this could work, and then help to the take-up of this. What we see here now is the beyond 5G reflections. So some frontiers reached, 5G KPIs challenged. Of course, in the course of such a program, you become a bit more realistic. You see, okay, that was what I wanted to achieve. Then we see how it goes. And there's always then some limits reached, and then we need to do more work, which is totally natural. And we see some limits emerging, also in terms of flexibility, looking at slicing. We had some interesting discussions yesterday. What are the limits of the slicing? Is this waste? Is this efficient? So indeed, things to look at, and also the scale of this. New frequency bands, we already touch the frontiers, let's say, in the 5G work with millimeter wave, a huge challenge which is not at all classified, let's say, and done. I mean, this will be a process that will continue. We are reaching the terahertz era. Terahertz communications will be very interesting. Radio continuum, spectrum issues, seamless use of spectrum. Yeah, cloud, we discussed it in the session before. I won't go into deep there. It's very interesting to see service provisioning and the different parts of the value chain influence this kind of service provisioning from telco cloud perspective to other players coming with cloud solutions in the network and in services. Yeah, and other things that are of course important. The user experience is important. Seeing the human as a vertical I found a bit dairy in the previous session. So I'd rather see it as we might have a business part and a consumer or citizens part, which is not to be mixed. Of course, also in the vertical side, you might think about human aspects. That's of course clear, how these systems will work, what is the interface to the human there, so very important, so we should bring that in. But we also have a whole narrative, especially in the NGI, if you look at the Next Generation Internet societal dimension of it, it's of course the human side is very important. It's not, I wouldn't call it as one vertical, that would be a bit too limited, I think. Yeah, and then we have some hypes, as we know, AI, blockchain. For me, they're really important when we look at future digital services. This was also highlighted. Of course, this will influence, will bring really new perspectives and new horizons there. So whatever we will use the internet, let's say 2025, 2030, this will be based on this kind of building blocks which will really shape this. So to be watched. And of course, in the network, we can see it a bit more pragmatic, looking at the networks. There will be tools to do automation in networks, to be more efficient and really use these opportunities. And I like the comment of one of the panelists yesterday, I think Dirk Drosten, was he say, in my teams these terms are banned, so you're not allowed to use them because it's very hyped. But yeah, I think we can see it, we shouldn't overhype it, we can see it as opportunities also here in this context. Good, and then, okay, I don't want to compete with Narcis with this nice video, so it was very beautiful and appealing. And also that's also the beauty of this conference, to have the different European venues. So this will continue next year. It was already mentioned that it will be coupled with a 5G global event. I hope you bear with us. We know that you like to travel a lot, but we also need to be a bit more efficient and bind things together. So we put it in 1 week. I think this will be also give some synergies and some critical mass to have the booths there, to show it to the international community even more, with a bit of a different constituency going to the global event, and for the others, EuCNC side also to have the opportunity to see the more policy-oriented side, let's say. So I think this is a very good solution. Yeah, I mentioned the quality. I think we have a good level here now, and this really makes this a success, to get enough participants that we know there's a serious work here, and we have the strategic relevance, which has always been a differentiator of this conference compared to others, like IEEE conferences that are happening. We have many of them, very important ones. But we also need a certain level of quality here in this conference, and I think we're doing well in this respect. So stay tuned. We will once the program is being shaped in the next months. Good. Then, from the key takeaways, give you some perspectives that might be interesting for you. Our current thinking, what we see as the next steps in the next years, and then what comes beyond. So 5G action plan, it was mentioned some of the activities are linked. I think at the end everything should be linked, because this is all for a purpose to make 5G a success in Europe. So it's important to remind the objectives there. I will also show you the 5G observatory that we launched. You might be interested in that. Then what are the next steps? We are now in the middle of phase 2 and then launching phase 3. Very closely linked to the EU 5G trial strategy. Some thoughts about the work program 2020, which was a bit of a leftover. I hope the lunch is not served yet. Good, I will speed up. And then we have the new EU budget, so Horizon Europe and CEF. CEF stands for Connecting Europe Facility, and this is quite interesting aspect to when I think about the panel before, to see, okay, we need also fundamental research and scientific work, and then the pillar on trials and capacity building and deployment. So I think with this setup, you will see it. We have quite a complementary structure and room for both, I think. Good. I think this many of you might know, so it's quite illustrative. We have some targets in the 5G action plan. It's actually the strategy of Europe for the 5G introduction. Early launch as soon as possible. So we see now operators indicating they have large-scale trials and say this will be also in 1 year we will then launch. So we see it on the horizon. And the target is, the first one is actually 2020, to have one city in the EU launching 5G per member state. So this is very important to be early as a home market for Europe for these kind of technologies and have the ecosystem developing here. And then we know from 2020, 2025, there will be the comprehensive rollout and the different verticals we hope will emerge. Not one size fits all, but depending on the maturity, depending on the partnerships that are coming up there. And in this context, all urban areas we would like to see covered from a public policy perspective, and also along main transport paths, highways, rail tracks, and so on. And this we would like to do in a coordinated fashion. So we try to work with the member states, also with the stakeholders, to have common approaches to have the critical mass, because as you know, in Europe we have a bit of the weakness to be a bit fragmented, spectrum auctions not being coordinated, and this we need to try to bring together. In this context, we said, okay, we need to launch this very closely, we look at this very closely. We have launched the 5G Observatory in Barcelona at the Mobile World Congress with 4 main pillars. We want to look at the main 5G market developments, 5G pre-commercial trials, then on the public side, the national strategies, plans by EU member state, and the spectrum assignments. So if you're interested, you can have a look. We had a first shot at the reporting for the so-called DESI, the Digital Economy Society Index. It's a kind of comparison of, I hope it's not for me, so, we still have some minutes left. So the idea is to compare between the member states to see where we stand. We will also have a study now launched and have quarterly executive reports and presentation on the platform in September. So there you can see where we stand in Europe, what are the latest developments, and be up to date. So this is how the reporting looked like as part of this DESI. So you see what are the main trials, the spectrum plans of member states, the national roadmaps, and so on. This slide we already saw from Jean-Pierre, so that's also very important because we see that the large-scale trials actually lead to the deployment and to the launch of a certain number of 5G products and services. Yeah, then where would we stand with phase 3? We have actually here 200 million for trials in the 18-19 programs. You know the structure, first core technologies leading to the proof of concept, and now we're in the middle of launching the large-scale trials. The platforms will be launched hopefully around the summer. And then the call on verticals will be able to build on these end-to-end validation platforms. And we have a specific call that was closing in April, you remember that, the connected car, so connected automated driving, specifically on this vertical as a strategic use case with 50 million, and you, I guess, waiting for the results, and we see that we got good proposals and we'll be able to launch the budget more or less completely. And also thinking about, because it's a bit new, it will be difficult to set up with member states' involvement to maybe have
another call in the last year of the program on this topic. This, you see, a bit was coming up concretely in terms of dates. So the red ones are the ones that already closed and have been evaluated. And then we have the upcoming ones end of this year, 14th November, on the verticals. Next year, long-term evolution, very important also to look at in parallel, to be open to new ideas and continue. On the technology side, development side and research side. And also one more international cooperation call with Taiwan in January. Yeah, not so much information available. This is under definition, the work program 2020. You might remember we had 18, 19, 20 work program, and then the member states, and we agreed 3 years planning is a bit heavy, a bit unflexible. So the last year was actually only somehow in draft with some first indications. So this is something that we still have to finalize this year, maybe to be adopted beginning of next year. We will see how we advance. And yeah, we already thought about a number of things as in the phasing approach, then to go further to innovation on the one hand, looking at hardware and software where we can now really leverage the 5G momentum to these kind of products. Verticals might also, of course, in this context play a role. We will have to think about that. And then we have the second part of the long-term RNI, the evolution, that was cut in two more or less, and we will position this now in the work program 2020, of course, review what we achieved and what we still need to do. And then, as I mentioned, we think it's important that we have a pan-European approach for the corridors, to have, on the one hand, different regions in Europe, to start this from a European perspective, and also a number of things that still need to be addressed after having looked at what we selected. So we are thinking about another call in this context to be decided. So just some early thinking on that for your information. And finally, the last point, the new budget. Horizon Europe, which is the new framework program for research and innovation, and the Connecting Europe facility in particular. This is the overall budget. Just to give you a perspective, it's part of the single market innovation in digital. This is for 7 years. So that you remember maybe the discussion, Macron, Merkel, Brexit. So what Europe wants to put on the table as an overall package. So this is 1,300 billion roughly for this period, a bit more than 1% of GDP. And this part that we are interested in here is in this first pillar, the single market innovation in digital. So we have to keep in mind this is a proposal that the Commission made last month. And yeah, of course, to be negotiated with member states. And you can imagine, looking at these different topics here, that will be a lot of different interests of member states and discussions there. So it's not something that will necessarily look like that, but that's a proposal. And we have, when you look at digital, we were quite successful, and we got a lot of support, of course, of many member states to address digital in this MFF, and we need to be more ambitious in digital. So we have a dedicated program called Digital Europe Program that we proposed for around 9 billion. We call it capacity building. So it's one step further from research and innovation to really make a difference in Europe and for example, procure supercomputers, where there's market failure, but it's not only to researching those and designing those, but really to procure them, to have them here in Europe. It's very strategic. Just one example. Artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, these are capacities that Europe needs in the future to be competitive. So this is a new concept, a new program. Also skills, very important, and then the use of these technologies in different, for example, in the public sector. Then Horizon Europe, where digital is a bit better than status quo. So you will see later how much we will have also for this area of networks and services. But it's around 100 billion, which is a huge increase of the Horizon Europe itself, of the research program. And then for the digital side, it's as we have the DEP, maybe not such a proportionate increase as for the overall program, but still a nice increase. And then, very important, the Connecting Europe facility. This is on deployment, and we have 3 billion here for connectivity. CEF, it's also, Connecting Europe is not only about networks and digital, it's also about energy and transport. So they have the biggest part. And then for the digital, we have 3 billion earmarked, and 1 billion actually earmarked for the corridors, not for testing, but actually for the deployment in cross-border regions. We have also the media program that might be of interest, continuing what we have today with around 1 billion. So I'm over time now, so I will go quickly. You see the pillar 2, which is the most interesting in our context here. There are a number of clusters defined, and one of them is digital and industry. So it's not exclusively on digital, but it's shared with the industry, but also stressing that policy decision makers see digital really as a key enabler for our industry. So this can also be seen very positive, but at the end there needs to be some sharing. So we have 15 billion for digital and industry, and we have 4 of the so-called intervention areas that are related to digital. So digital technology is actually what you can imagine, like Excel. You might know this joint undertaking is microelectronics components. Yeah? We have one part artificial intelligence, so the research and innovation part of that, compared to the capacity building that we discussed before. And the heading where also then the evolution of 5G would be to be seen is the next generation internet heading, the intervention area. And we have also high performance computing and big data. You might look at the framework program text that has been adopted as a proposal, and there you see the first bullet is actually more the infrastructure part. And this relates to the discussion we had before, so we have actually room also for bottom-up research. It's not only roadmap-based. Of course, the partnership is the right structure to do the roadmap-based part. And the first bullet here actually covers the infrastructure elements, and that would be very in focus, but the other ones are also very important, looking at services and applications in a next-generation internet context. So I won't go through the text. You might have a look if you're interested in the proposal. Thinking beyond 5G, I think it's the last slide. So we have here 2 main pillars, and this might be also looked at thinking about the next partnership that Werner and Jean-Pierre already touched upon. So we have, of course, remaining and new challenges. That's more like what is the next steps from beyond 5G, what we also discussed a lot in this conference. I won't go into detail here. And we have another pillar now, as I mentioned, 3 billion for connectivity and 1 billion for the corridors, which are really building upon what we're starting now with the trialing in the cross-border regions. So here we need to think about what is the role also of a future partnership to consider this instrument. And the last point here on the bottom on Horizon Europe, the involvement of member states is crucial, because when we talk about deployment and public funding, the public sector is of course very concerned, and it's important. So I'm through, nearly on time. So thanks a lot for having stayed so long, and we still have maybe some time for 1 or 2 questions, and then of course over lunch possibility to discuss a bit more. Thanks a lot.
So are we having any questions from the audience? For Peter? If not, actually I wanted, well, people are hungry. I just wanted to ask for this work program 2020, for this cross-border additional corridors, is it the idea to have additional corridors in addition to the ones now, or complementing them the other way, so not cross-border but actually some within countries, so perhaps connecting the existing ones, or what's the...
Yeah, that's a very good question. So maybe 2 elements on that.
of course, when we have European programs, we would continue to focus on the cross-border, because just connecting them in terms of deployment will be then other instruments that we also can coordinate, but it's not in the program that we will design, especially in Work Program 2020. So we won't, as usual, have very strict criteria and eligibility. It's also up to the community to just propose what makes sense most in terms of innovation, what needs to be done for different stakeholders. So yeah, new corridors would be welcome, because the geographical reach is important to have really a European approach and not start, okay, we have a couple of 2-3 corridors in some countries and then the rest is not involved. So that's an important point, but then of course it's important also in terms of progress, what you actually do and test and try on these corridors. So it's not about just putting another test bed and then we're happy. So it needs to be also justified by a step change in research and innovation.
So also complementary in terms of
what will be done on the corridors, yeah.
Exactly.
And then, but then the other aspect that you mentioned in terms of like, you can imagine also what could 5G do for automation in cities, for cars, or in other aspects. This we would rather see in the verticals call that will be coming end of this year, which is open to all verticals, but of course automotive can come back. So if there are some other ideas there that are not related to cross-border corridors, they would have an opportunity in this call. That's how we see it. At the end, of course, we're not too strict in eligibility. Whatever is proposed has to be evaluated, and what is in scope in principle, what makes sense, and yes. Thanks. Bon appétit.
Perhaps any other question, or then thank you again, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So that's all, folks. Thank you for coming, and see you next year.
Also from my side, thanks a lot for having you here. It was great, a nice event, and I hope you really enjoyed it to the very last moment. Thanks a lot.